Well, let me welcome you. It is once again webinar time here at HFA, and we always like to bring to you subjects that are important to you and your business and really helping that business to be healthy. And today we're going to be talking about reverse logistics. It is what it sounds like, folks. It's everything coming back your direction, whether it's returns, repairs, recycled materials, all of those sorts of things. We're going to be getting into that today because there are a number of ways that you can really improve that process and help your bottom line. But before we do that, I want to, of course, do a little bit of housekeeping here. As always, you can find this webinar and all the other webinars at myhfa.org/webinar. The entire library is there. Go there, find the subject you're looking for, click on. You're going to get an hour of wonderful takeaways, no matter the subject. That's number one. Number two, bottom of your screen, you will see a little Q&A button. If you have a question that you'd like to have asked based on something we've talked about, please enter it there. We will do our best to get to those questions. We have those questions that you guys, of course, gave us at the beginning. And also I want to mention for those of you out there who are involved in the Synchrony Ignite program, Synchrony, by the way, we always thank them. They are the thought leader that sponsors our education here at HFA. But we will be giving a code at the end of this webinar so you can get some Ignite points, and who doesn't like that? So appreciate all of that, but let me just get right into it here. We've got a couple of terrific panelists joining us today to talk about reverse logistics and how we can really help you minimize the financial impacts and implement new policies and things of that sort. We've got Brian Lysett. He is the CEO of Service Technologies. They are a complete lifecycle management solution provider. And so when we're talking about lifecycle, that's everything to do with all the products that you move in and out and those that come back, et cetera. So Brian, we thank you for being here. I know you're going to give us some great insights.
Thank you.
And Arindam Basu is management consultant for 1,000 Mile Partners. They're a consulting firm, but also he spent quite a bit of time as director of logistics for Jerome's Furniture. They're a top 100 retailer and a great member of HFA. And so he's going to be able to also bring a lot to the table here as well. So gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. You know, it's interesting when we talk about reverse logistics. I did not coin this, but I know that when I first started dealing with this a number of years ago, somebody said to me, they said, it's really about the 5 R's. And those R's are returns, reselling, repairs, replacements, and recycling. So really any of these things that are essentially bringing product back. And I guess that let's start this way, guys, because there's so many ways we can define it. I don't want to get into so much the specific definitions because we will get into all of this. But Brian, let me ask you first, how would you say that how costly it is if this part of your business, if reverse logistics is not done right, how costly can this really be, just to get people's attention right out of the gates here?
I mean, I think a sale could easily turn negative if it's not handled properly. So your whole profit margin plus your cost can be out the window. There's a lot of, like you said, the 5 R's. I mean, there's a lot of ways to help mitigate that. But I truly believe that, and I've seen with my own eyes in 25 years, obviously, it not handled correctly. So
okay.
I agree that I think it definitely is a bottom line eater all day.
Okay. All right.
Let me add some statistics to that more globally, not simply in home furnishings, because their Reverse Logistics Association actually had a conference earlier this year, and they presented a study, a joint study by Arizona State University and Colorado State University. And they said the annual value of returned goods in the U.S. is said to be approaching $1 trillion. Now, $300 billion of that occurs around the holiday season. The holiday returns alone is $300 billion. But you're talking, I mean, these are astronomical numbers. $300 billion for just around the holidays. That's representing 30% of, which kind of makes sense with all the seasonality trends that we're used to
100%.
in the home furnishings industry. You know that it's a $1 trillion issue.
Let me just ask you guys right out of the gates, because I think that we're also dealing with, particularly since COVID hit, which really just sort of hyper focused all of this. But, you know, haven't we been hurt? And I'm talking about, when I say we, the home furnishings industry, even though our items are for the most part larger, et cetera, isn't this whole concept of easy returns by the large online sellers and things of that sort, hasn't that also just added to this from a mentality standpoint from the customer? And Brian, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think it has. I mean, if I can buy something and know that I could try it out, and if I don't like it and I have buyer's remorse, which is probably a big percentage of that trillion, um, and able to, with the easy returns and, 30 days, try it out for 6 months, 3 months. I've seen crazy astronomical things number wise when it comes to the length of time that someone can have something before returning it.
And I just because I think that part of this is psychology, right? And I think that this is just added to this concept of, oh, it's a piece of cake to return it, and really no thought to the fact there's a cost after that. Let me ask, and Arindam, we'll start with you on this one. So with all the possible things out there, I'm just kind of want to see which you're going to lift off the page for me right now. Where's the first major area that a retailer in home furnishings, whether it's the single store operator or larger, that they can positively impact this? What do you think those one or two things are, maybe the categories, if you will, of how they can bring those numbers down for their business? Where are you seeing the most success?
I think that this issue really has to go back to a real understanding of forecasting. So Harvard Business Review recently published a study that says 98% of business leaders say their organization has faced one or more detrimental effects from material shortages due to material shortages to missed revenue opportunities, to decreased customer satisfaction and profitability, all due to bad forecasting. So I think the foundation is, let's control what we can control, and let's examine where things fall apart on our end. Let's review our current planning processes. So that has to do with accurate data management, optimizing the models and integrating the data and opinions from across your organization. So make sure that our forecasting, our processes are not myopic. And you kind of, do your variance analysis, reconcile your actual versus your actual versus planned, and then be flexible with your KPIs. You have your KPIs determined up front, but then understand and be willing to modify those KPIs based on actuals. So I really think it goes back to integrating the processes across the organization. Sometimes that's very difficult. Communication is always key, and then being willing and flexible to modify expectations.
Let me clarify one thing for me. So when you talk about data and this forecasting, forecasting is a big word. Business forecasting involves everything. But what is it we're specifically looking for data-wise in our forecasting that's going to help us with this reverse logistics? I don't want to call it a problem, but this reverse logistics issue.
Yeah, I think it's, are we skating to where the puck is going, not where it is, right? So it's sales data and market trends and making sure we're seasonally accurate on our top line data. Okay, because if we're not accurately forecasting sales, then we're going to miss the boat on what we're selling, and then we're going to have more returns. So I feel like that's kind of a lot of the crux of the issue. Now, I do understand. Let me add to that.
Yep.
That high return rates typically signal issues with product quality. Whether it's production runs or componentry or design, but also there's also poor communication of assembly procedures. And then sometimes the look and feel on the web is different than what it is on the retail floor. So a lot of these things have to do with communication and messaging. Let me give you a quick example of the assembly procedure issue. There were some dining chairs that they had some holes drilled in the legs of the dining chairs. They were partially drilled such that the Phillips head screw would anchor into the wood if it was correctly drilled all the way in. But it wasn't pre-drilled all the way in simply because you would ruin the anchoring. But what people were doing is they were not they were going just as far it was the pre-drilled hole was, and they ended up with a whole bunch of dining chairs falling apart. Now that's a communication issue of assembly procedure not being accurately communicated, such that we can drill the holes deep to anchor the screw correctly, so the chair doesn't fall apart when you get to the customer premise.
Wow. All right. So you've this is why this is such a complex issue, because you've touched on about five major things here. So Brian,
Right.
before we go any further,
Mhm.
let me bring you into that. Talk specifically about this, about what Arindam is talking about with the forecasting piece. Are you also, buying into that as being important? If so, how do you define what it is you want to know to be able to properly forecast?
I look at it, I agree with him, but I also look at other factors. One thing is training, right? I think training is a major piece of return logistics. I don't know the exact percentage, but I'm willing to gamble that a high percentage of returns occur due to a poor delivery.
Okay.
Damaged merchandise, stained merchandise, things like that. If we have better technology and better training, better, better, and when I say training, it could be as simple as what we're saying to a customer when a damaged piece is in the home. Okay. It could be, oh my God, this is stained. Oh yeah. Oh wow. Okay. It's stained. You know what? It's really easy to get that out. We can probably have a cleaner out here in a few days or tomorrow. With technology, the driver could actually look and see when a cleaner would be available. Like Service Hub does that, where on the delivery app, it actually allows permissions based on the skill level of a driver, right? And the driver can actually help keep the unit in the home. But most of them, they don't. I mean, we've all had furniture delivered. There are some good ones out there. I've seen them. I
Hmm.
recently had furniture delivered from Bears. Wonderful delivery team. Came in, I mean, just did everything they needed to do. But I've also had other retailers deliver, furniture to my house, and damages galore. And I've had to send them back. So I was a part of the return logistic problem at one point, unfortunately.
Well, I think we all are. So,
Yeah.
so I want to make sure we don't kind of miss anything here. Let's stick here for a second when you talk about training, because this is an important piece. Before
Yes.
you even get to the delivery team, however, and I'll let either of you jump in on this first of all. Let's talk about what are the things that I can be telling my sales team up front
That's the
that
next.
can help with the expectations of the customer, so that it maybe sort of heads off some of this. And either one of you take it right out of the gates here, but let's start there. What can I do to help to have my sales staff impact this positively?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll let you go first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Brian. I would say that, okay, so in certain product sets, yeah, what are the natural characteristics of the wood and leather, right? Is this a highly variable look? Is it, live edge table? Every SKU is quite unique. So we need to set the expectation up front that this is going to look different than the showroom floor.
That's a
This is going to look
great
different than the
example.
web, right?
Okay.
So those are two very important characteristics. Now, the other one that is really, I think, a training issue is the situation I described. Brian described as training, I described as communication, is, how to assemble, how were the screws drilled in, how are the screws drilled in effectively. That's training, that's communication. That needs to happen up front, not just with the sales team, but with the delivery teams, with the warehouse teams.
And
So
and go ahead, Brian. I'm sorry. I'm going to follow up there. But go
no, no,
ahead.
no. I agree with him 1,000%. I mean, what he said about leather is, I mean, the best example of training. I mean, leather is a very natural product, and you have different types. You have, nubuck, which is like a suede feel. You have aniline, which is just butter soft, scratches with your fingernails, and then you have pigmented or type P, which has a complete protection over it, a whole finish over it that will help it not stain, or damage as easy. And that's a great example of the training. Customers may get it and see a scar, and they're like, oh my God, this is supposed to be perfect. The one in the showroom was perfect.
Mhm.
But the reality is even when I was a tech in my days, I would explain to a customer, you know, what that's about. And honestly, in other countries, they pay extra because it actually proves that it's real. In America, they want it uniform, perfect, matching.
Well, you
It
know,
is.
and you know the one thing that and I love the fact that this is where we've started, because you know you're talking about the fact that while we know that the vast majority of people begin the buying process for home furnishings on a tablet, on their phone, whatever it might be, we know that the vast majority are transacted in the store. So our biggest initial takeaway here is you can't think of reverse logistics as just on the delivery people. That
Yep.
it starts with this education piece, and Arindam, I love what you said about the fact of even the chairs. It's just like if there's anything that requires assembly, explaining specifically how that goes could have prevented you know, a major issue like that. So I love that that's something that anybody listening to this can impact it in that way. So
Absolutely.
now we go from there, and so now let's talk a little bit more about this delivery piece. But before we get there, because how much of this can also be avoided if there's proper handling of the product before it gets there, because we know about how that can be a real problem here too. So I'm just going to walk us through this training process. So next is the handling of it, whether it's in your, you know, the back room of your store, in your warehouse, in your distribution center, whatever. You guys, talk about that a little bit, about what those teams need to really know and understand from that standpoint.
Yeah, the deluxing process is the step before it goes on the truck. Absolutely. It gets pulled, it gets checked, it gets touched up, fixed, whatever needs to be done to get it back to pretty much deliverable condition if there is damage. And the way that it's loaded on the truck, you know, obviously that can cause problems if it's not properly packed, if it's not properly wrapped, that can cause problems. If the people delivering it can't handle the item, that can cause problems. If where you're delivering it to has an upstairs, very small door. Like let's take Manhattan as a great example, right? Those pre-war buildings weren't exactly built for people my size, right?
Yep.
You know, so at the end of the day, you're delivering these sofas, and we even see, you know, people, you know, cutting sofas in half to bring them in places and try to put them back together. I mean, it's kind of, you know, when he brought up the salesperson, obviously it starts there, but then when you get to that point, we got to make sure that not only does it look good and it's ready to go for the customer, but that we actually can execute that delivery in a fashion that doesn't damage it and upset the customer. And we can't go above expectations. I know we'd like to, and we do a lot, right? We want to sell it. We want to get it to the customer. The customer really wants it. He loves it. But the reality is, can it even fit in the door? You know,
Yeah.
what's the odds that you're actually going to damage it by bringing it in that particular building, that door, that elevator, even the consumer's house or room to room? Anything can occur. So it's kind of like figuring that out as well, in my mind.
I'd like to piggyback off that, Brian, because there have been instances where the conversation actually needs to happen a step earlier between the rep and the buyer. Okay, so you're talking about a marble tabletop or a glass tabletop. A marble tabletop is very, very heavy. How is it going to be packaged? How is it going to be handled in the rack? Can it be delivered effectively without dropping it? Because there was an instance where we were working with one supplier, and they had a marble tabletop, and this good is a beautiful table, could not be delivered because the tabletop was too heavy. So what they had to do is they go back to a redesign, go underneath the tabletop, and take a chunk of marble out in the manufacturing process, in the design process, such that the look and feel of the table was the same, but the weight was much more manageable. So there even needs to be this understanding throughout the organization from the buyer and also the rep perspective of how does this actually functionally go through all the steps in our organization and get into the customer's house, get into the premise. Because if you don't take those kinds of factors into account, you're just going to set yourself up to get burned. And those are things that could have been 100% avoided. So we can't
Sure.
really add that to customer preference burden of the issue.
Well, I mean, you know, there's only so much we can do, right? I mean, we can certainly help customer expectations, right? We can certainly help from that standpoint, but so
Mhm.
much of this, what we're talking about, is in the hands of the people that are watching this this webinar, which are the retailers themselves. And I love what you said there, and I think you guys would probably both agree that just even ensuring, and I know this sounds rudimentary, but also ensuring it's the correct items are going out there. You know, there's that attention to detail in that process before it even gets loaded on the truck. You know, that's a huge part of this. So we're working our way now. So now on that delivery side, and Brian, I'll let you start on this because you already kind of mentioned some of the things that you like to see communicated with, you know, from that driver standpoint, the delivery people, as far as those expectations. What are some of the key things that folks should be aware of, or practices maybe that you feel really are helpful in curbing the amount of returns?
Well, I think anything from a stain or damage standpoint, furniture wise, I think there's a few things that could be done. Number one is training of the drivers, obviously, right? To make sure they understand the proper handling, how to do things right. It could be that they have to be the ones assembling, as you were saying, and to make sure that they understand what they're doing the right way and not damage something, okay, when it's being delivered. Beyond that, obviously, if there is a stain or damage and the opportunity arises for the customer to go, hey, you know, I don't want this, you know, how can you train that driver? How can we improve the skill set communication wise with the customer to keep that piece in the home and actually get it cleaned or repaired right in the home? I have seen things come back because it didn't have a pull handle attached by accident, you know, when it was assembled. A mechanism is we've gone to homes where a mech or back to the DC to repair something where a mechanism wouldn't open. Well, it was tied shut. You know, these simple little things get missed. And I think all of that goes back to, again, training of the drivers, you know,
Okay.
in my mind. I think that also if they have the right skill set, the customer will accept it. They'll keep it in the home. They'll be able to send a qualified technician out to actually clean or repair it. And if you have the proper technology, all of that can be done standing right in the customer's home.
Fair. A couple of questions that have come in that I want to get to. Is there an industry average or an average return rate for furniture businesses? I mean, I know we talked about that big $1 trillion number, but do we have an idea about what some of the average return rates are? Dom, do you have that?
I don't.
Yeah, so I don't have a statistic that's an independent market study. Experientially, I'd say it's about 9%. I've seen as high as 16% for an individual supplier when you get into a situation where there's a defective product run.
Okay, fair enough. So, first chunk of this webinar, we understand that maybe the number one job that folks running furniture stores need to know is to train everybody on this process, making sure there's great communication all the way through. Are there, this leads into a few other questions that have come in. So can this also be managed in some ways through better policies, better communicated policies with the customer? Brian, I see you nodding. Why don't you start with that one?
I think so. I think not only with the customer, but internal policies like standard procedures, SOPs, things like that, to make sure that everyone's following those, because those are normally created to avoid these kind of problems when you can, right? But as far as, the return policies, it's really hard for people not to match what the competitor's doing, right? That we all know that. I mean, if you're saying, yeah, no hassle-free returns, free returns, no restocking fees, people are going to hold you to it. I mean, my wife literally won't buy something from somewhere if she has to pay for shipping. You know what I mean? Unless she can't find it somewhere. So when a company is offering that, there are people really looking right at that, and they know it, and they're going to utilize it against you. And it's actually can be a good thing, but dollar wise, as he's saying, $1 trillion, it could also be a bad thing. When customer remorse is a big reason for returns, I truly believe that. I have been to countless homes and found no issues. It's just the customer does not like it. They don't like what they bought. It's like they bought a pair of shoes instead of trying them on, and walking in the store with them, they took them home, walked around. Now they're bringing them back, and half of the rubber's gone on the bottom pretty much, and at the end of the day, if that's the policy you're allowing, you have to honor it, and you got to take care of the customer in that fact. Now, what would happen if you rearranged your policy or redid it and excluded some of that, right? Maybe had a restocking fee to kind of make people, not want to return it. I don't want to pay a 10%, restocking fee, 20%, or whatever the normal charges are now. But if you're in store, if this is a brick and mortar unit where you're actually dealing with a salesperson, I think training, again, we go back to make sure that we're getting the customer the right product. We don't want to get them something that they don't really want, because we want to make the couple extra $100 on the sale, the extra commission, and I get that. But what's the blowback going to cost you?
Right.
That couple of hundred extra really isn't significant when you look at what can happen with that kind of a open return policy. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I feel that this customer preference issue is significant, and I've targeted that in terms of my discussions, in terms of, yes, policies and procedures, but also what I mentioned earlier is forecasting. Are we buying the right stuff and getting the right stuff in people's hands in the first place? Now, the thing that we're in, the world environment is that easy returns are a tipping point for consumers where deciding where to buy, right? Just like free shipping, the example that Brian pointed out earlier, free shipping is a tipping point. Easy returns is a tipping point. So we are in a situation when you're dealing with these customer preference or customer remorse returns that you are attempting to change consumer behavior. So the trick is that anytime we kind of go down that path, that we, by potentially discouraging returns, we are potentially discouraging buying in the first place. Okay, so Brian talked about restocking fee. Some European retailers have begun charging nominal transaction fees for returns. It's not to try to recoup money, because what they're charging is so insignificant relative to the cost of the reverse logistics process. But it is an attempt to change consumer behavior, to really ask the question, is this return based on customer remorse or customer preference really an impetus to take action?
And to piggyback on that real quick,
Mhm.
I would love to talk to a couple of retailers, after this as well, to kind of figure out, do they know what reverse logistics are really costing them? And are they truly set up to handle it in the right way? You know what I mean? Because if you're not, you're going to get killed. I mean, your bottom line is definitely going to die. And
You're just bleeding money at that point.
at that point, you just, okay, pick it up, return. I'm going to be honest, and I'll just throw a name out there, Wayfair. I don't know how they do it. It's incredible, right? I mean, there's a couple of them that are like that, and at the end of the day, more power to them. I mean, the sales might outweigh, what's coming back through that process, but at the end of the day, how much money are they leaving on the table by not handling something in a proper fashion? What are the procedures they have for a return? It could be as simple as, how is it, handled? How are we going to, what's the process when you bring that unit back? What are you going to do with it?
So let me ask you before we get off of this. So let me get. So are we into restocking fees as long as they're minimal and they're just mainly that the customer realizing that there's a little bit of skin in the game if they return it, or how do we feel about that? And I because I'm hearing a little bit of both from the two of you. So just give me both of you an idea about. So what would you say to somebody that said, should I charge a restocking fee?
I would.
Yeah, I would say that yes, until the customer is ready to walk. I mean, I have it be a waivable, because I mean, I don't. Once you have this customer engagement, it's very important to leverage, right? So the whole thing is, what does the customer want if they don't want that? So that there is, once you're kind of down the road here, and you're still able to generate a profitable transaction, by retaining that level of engagement. Once that level of engagement is gone, it's so much more expensive to try to re-engage with that same customer. So it's possible to use it as a point of communication, as a point of building a relationship, as opposed to, look, I have to do something penal because what you're trying to do is hurting me financially.
Yep, I gotcha. And I guess the you know, I mean, I get it. It's a fine line, right? But I like what you said, that just to make it waivable. So if it's the circumstance where you feel like it's not going to be worth the couple $100 coming back to lose that customer, or to have a negative experience, and gosh knows they can then go and do a couple of terrible reviews for you. Yeah, I get it. So you're saying use it as a tool, but don't have it be a hard and fast thing that you can't.
Maybe even
with it.
tier it, like, you know, if you have a 30-day return policy, if you return it in the first 5 days, it's no restocking fee. After 14 days, it's 5%. At 30 days, you're at that 10%. Something in that, because the faster you do get it back, the faster you could sell it to someone else. You know, I feel, and it's not used, it could still be new. There's a lot of differences in the time that's passed as well.
Are there any best practices, gentlemen, when it comes to return policies like that, or some of these things that we're talking about here? Anything that you can share?
No, me personally, I think, you know, starting at like maybe a 10% restocking fee, you
Okay.
know, something fair. And, you know, obviously you can use your best judgment to waive that fee, depending
Okay.
on the type of customer, who the customer is, the amount they spent. I mean, if they have spent $50,000 in your store and they're returning a table that's $200, what are we arguing about? You know,
Yep.
at that point it's one thing, but you know, if they want to return 40,000 of the 50,000, that's a different conversation with the customer, probably, right?
Mhm.
Depending on how long you've had it.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk about the engagement with the customer, because the relationship has been established. But in essence, by making a transaction, the customer does have skin in the game, right? You know, it's a pain
Fair.
for them to return to. So, so the whole thing is, let's maximize that transaction. If it's less profitable, but the net present value of the overall revenue stream from that customer is still positive, then you go.
Yep.
And I also kind of hear you both saying to, you know, this is all about knowing your customers as well, right? I mean, this is one of those things
Yeah.
where, rather than it being that we templatize this, if you will, and say, hey, here's the best way to do this, you got to know what your customer base is all about, right? And as far as where you see those areas that need the improvement, or where you've seen more returns coming from a certain category or something along those lines. So I think that's critically important. There was a question I didn't want to get too far out here. I'd like to try to get to as many of these as we can. Somebody was asking about, it says how long before delivery should you open and inspect the item? I don't know if that's really answerable, but I guess they're just trying to prevent you know, mistakes from going out the door. Is there anything along those lines you guys can give any insight on?
You mean prior to taking it to the customer's home?
Correct.
In the deluxing process?
Yeah.
Most DCs are doing that like the night before.
Okay.
Correct. You know, should they open it earlier, because you might have to cancel a delivery or quickly go get another piece, swap it out. It just depends on that process in that retailer. I've
Okay.
seen it 2 days prior, I've seen it a day before. I don't know
Okay.
about you, but that's pretty much what my experience has been.
Okay. I hope we didn't lose Arin down there. He might have had a little bit of a moment. Brian, let me also ask you this too, while we're on this subject, this part of the subject. You mentioned earlier, is 30 days about when it comes to home furnishings, is that what you think is the right time frame? We've gotten a lot of questions before the webinar and during the webinar here about that time frame. What they should offer and say return within. What would you say, is 30 days the standard?
From my standpoint, I think 30 days is more than fair to a consumer. I think it's less fair to the retailer, because a lot can happen in 30 days. You know, and it's
True.
unfortunate, but you know, based on your policy, you may have to take that piece back, right? So
Sure.
I think 30 days is a great number for a customer, for a retailer. I think it definitely, you know, leans in favor of the customer.
Sure. And there's others that have shorter durations, but you just, once again, gauge it to your customer base. what you feel is acceptable. Let me ask you this before we get too much further along here. But oh, you're back. Hi, Rendam. How are
Yes, I
you?
apologize.
That's all right. You got back. That's all that matters. Let me, well, I'll throw this one at you first. This is the other piece of this that is not only necessarily a struggle, but something that that retailers have to deal with, and that's the packaging materials. You know, a lot of times you've got these, you know, obviously those materials are a lot of times are stay in the DC or your back room, but a lot of times they're, you know, there's still materials they're bringing back. So can we talk a little bit about that from a cost containment standpoint, as far as you know, all of the materials that these items are packaged in, et cetera, and maybe ways to manage that as well? I think he froze. Brian, I'll let you take that one.
Um, I think that the way they're packed is super important for, you know, to protect the item. I'm not as familiar as, and probably in, you know, the waste of it, you know, that portion of it.
Sure.
I'll defer to him for that, but I can tell you that, you know, I actually have an item on my desk right now that we received, and it was packaged poorly for shipment, and it's broken. So I had my rep put it here on my desk so I could send a picture of it back to my vendor. So, you
Okay.
know, I mean, it is important, you know, to protect the item. But in relation to your question, I'll defer to him.
Arindam, if you wouldn't mind taking that, can you talk a little bit about, because that was one of the many things that we had prior to this starting here, was a question about the dealing with the reverse logistics aspect of the packing materials, a lot of that stuff that people are coming back with after the delivery.
Yes, so I think the rewraps is a great way to kind of leverage that. Now, there's a very difficult process in terms of, okay, it's manual. You know, we have not figured out how to kind of automate that, but leveraging that rewrap, leveraging that technology. I used the example of the glass and marble tabletops previously.
Right.
Those types of items that require those specific packaging, and even some of the live edge tables and the leather sofas with you know, which have the natural characteristics. Even some of that packaging can be leveraged, because that's important to the delivery of the product. That was designed with that product made in mind.
Fair. You know, one of the things that when you guys talk about having a plan and really, you know, making certain that you're understanding, and Brian, you said it too, you got to understand what your cost levels are. Do you also need to include in that having a very specific reselling policy internally, as far as those items, you know, and you know, looking at what you can do with them prior to those things coming back? Can you talk a little bit about what you feel the retailer should have in place when it comes to the reselling aspect?
Yeah, I think that there's some retailers that are very good at it. You know, they have clearance centers. You know, they have stores dedicated to returns, and people are going in there and eating them up, you know, as long as they're sellable. But yeah, I mean, you know, it can be a challenge if it's not resellable, right? Like, what do you do with it then? You know, one of the biggest things I did at a prior company was work on salvage routines, you know, you know, to sell, you know, pieces in bulk to companies to try to recoup some of the cost for returns that were not able to be sold.
Okay.
So that there are challenges there, a lot of them. But yeah, I think that you have to have those routines in place, those SOPs on how to handle those items. And since you know what you're selling, and you know what you're able to do with a return, is so important. I mean, you have, like he said, these leather pieces that go out. It could have a minor damage to it from delivery. You bring it back, you might be able to clearance it out. If it's destroyed, you know, I mean, there's always a dumpster in the back, right? Unfortunately, but the reality is that you have to have some kind of policy and procedure in place to handle, depending on what the damages are.
Arindam, can you talk a little bit about that just real quick?
Yeah, I also, you know, I agree on the policies. I agree that it's very manual, but there can be standards based on the tier or category of good.
Yeah.
Also, are we sure that the item that is returned, that this is a customer preference or delivery issue, or is it a manufacturing issue? Is there an opportunity to get a vendor credit? So we really need to make sure we're categorizing these return reasons accurately, and that is accomplished by incentivizing the return team to kind of do an accurate job of categorizing that.
I just love that because, man, you know, you bring up a great point there. There are multiple avenues, right, to recoup cost. And what I'm hearing you guys say is make sure you've got those procedures in place so that stuff's not just sitting. You come in and you could, I mean, think about that for me. You could basically say, hey, we can get a vendor credit on this one because of X, because this one, or this can go to resale. I just hear you guys continually saying here that this has got to be something you plan out and not just sit there and go, what do we get? What did we get back today? Kind of a
The
situation.
chargeback process is so important because not only to get a chargeback or a credit from your vendor if it's a defective item, but if it's damaged by a delivery team, say a third party,
Right.
you know, you're able to recoup the cost that way as well. So you know, you want to have those things in place, and then for items that come back that can be easily fixed, brand new, that's another process. Make sure you have that repair process in place in your DC,
So
your back rooms.
I'm so glad you said that because my question about that is clearly that's important for everybody to have an idea about how they can deal with minor repairs and things of that sort. But Brian, you said something interesting a little bit ago, and I want to get both of you to chime in on this one. Is that also, it sounded to me like you were advocating for training of the delivery teams to manage or mitigate some of those damage issues, or maybe whether it's properly sizing up what the issue is to give the team at the store a better shot at getting this fixed, or if it's something minor that could be on the spot. Are you suggesting that they've really got to be able to assess those kind of things, or what are the skills that they need to have for this repair question?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, number one, you have to have people skills. You have to be able to talk to a customer and kind of
Final mile, man. Final
yeah,
mile, right?
all day, all day. You have to be able to de-escalate the situation. I mean, I've received damaged goods and kept them in my home because, you know, being in the industry, I obviously know what can be done to fix it. To me, it's no big deal. But, you know, to Mrs. Jones, this is the first time she's buying a $5,000 sofa, right? And she works really hard for her money and she wants to get every dollar's worth, every penny out of it. You know, she's going to look at it like I'm buying damaged goods.
Right.
Well, if you have a seasoned person in there, and I've seen them, they're out there, they're great delivery guys out there. And then there are some that I love that damage everything so my company can go fix it, you know, but at the same time, you know, the seasoned ones, they're the ones that can help you out a lot. And you got to give them the power, you got to give them the training and the tools to do that.
And so are we talking about, just to make sure that we're clear here, you're talking about, they don't necessarily have to be the ones that repair it on the spot, but your point is that let's use scenarioize this for a second. So somebody says there's a minor bit of damage, that person being able to recognize it, empathize with the customer, and then basically say, let me right now schedule, or let's work on getting somebody to come out here to take a look at this to make sure that this can be put. So that's what I hear you talking about, correct?
Absolutely, because if you don't, I will tell you right now, the delivery process can be painful to a customer. You know, I definitely have had painful experiences with delivery, from wasted time to just, you know, poor communication. And I've had great ones too. If a delivery driver simply puts them at ease and say, hey, listen, yeah, that's no big deal. You know,
We're gonna make this
I
right.
know they can even say things like, you know, I know I don't think we have any more of these in stock. You know, they may have the knowledge of that or be able to sell it to the customer like you'd have to wait for a new one thing. And anything you could do to keep it in the home, not trying to trick the customer, but we know that it's a simple fix, you
Yep.
know. And it could be carrying, even stocking your drivers with simple common parts that may be needed, that may be missed. Like I received work orders many times just to go install sectional connectors, you know, which is part of the delivery process. So now, you know, obviously they delivered it. They had to pay that company to do that. Now they have to pay my company to send someone out to put on connectors. You know, not in my best interest to say this stuff, but no, all jokes aside, I think it's important if you have a well-trained delivery guy, delivery person, they can keep the furniture in the home and help get it resolved and put the customer at ease is the most
Yep.
important thing. Because once you de-escalate that situation and the customer's comfortable with it, as long as what you say is going to happen happens,
Yep.
you still got a customer for life, and you don't
Customer
have
expect
a return.
yep. Customer expectations. Arinda?
Yeah, yeah. So there is one trick to this, is that what is this person at the customer premise? What's their compensation structure? Are they incentivized to take that and have that kind of opportunity to almost upsell the customer, right? Because in situations where it's not in that person's best interest, if there's some kind of time parameter, some kind of percentage of a delivery parameter that's creating a situation where they are better incentivized to hit a greater number than to have higher customer satisfaction, you're going to have you're going to have competing interests in that person's mind, right? So that's a very difficult situation, because then you go down into compensation drives behavior. What behavior are we trying to drive, and how do we compensate for that accurately?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, and it's that's also a little bit of a fine line. I guess it really depends upon, quite frankly, each individual company and how well trained their staff is, and what those incentives could look like. Because we get into this whole thing where this is, we said it a few minutes ago, but this is such a key piece of that final mile, that final piece of a transaction, but you got to get it right. And taking care of an issue like this is as important as it being a perfect installation, right? I mean, a delivery. So totally.
I would say, yeah, I would just add to that, is that was something I mentioned earlier, the net present value of the transaction. Once you're in this situation with the customer where there's a risk, the net present value of, as long as the net present value of the transaction is positive, then you have to go forward. So do whatever it takes to kind of have that net present value be positive, because you don't have any option at that point in time. You don't want to be in the situation, but you're in that situation.
Okay, fair. I'd like to also just briefly, if we could, because I talked about the 5 R's, and one of them is recycling, and this is a little side piece here, but critically important in certain aspects. Can either of you guys jump in on that one and talk a little bit about what retailers need to be really paying attention to and concerned about when it comes to the recycling aspect of certain things that are being returned or that are coming back?
One thing I'll say is that that green initiatives and mandates upon the recyclability or post-consumer recyclable content of a good they're not going to go away. In fact, they're only going to become more important as a part of the overall product process. So I don't really have any statistics on that. I do know that in California, the state government is kind of mandating this more and more with their own contracts for their vendors. So I can only imagine that it's going to kind of become a bigger factor in the commercial environments.
So Brian, something that people should definitively plan for if they aren't already, or thinking about it at the very least?
Yes, absolutely. And it can even go back to, again, back to everything I said before. If you can get it repaired, get it back on the showroom floor, get it sold, clearance it out, salvage it in some form or fashion, to recoup anything you can out of it, versus having to worry about recycling it. That's the
Fair.
best way to do it, absolutely.
You got it. So as we're working actually rapidly toward the end of our hour, which is, I told you, is going to go fast, and it always does.
Mhm.
I want to kind of take us back to a little bit something at the beginning, because we've talked about, just to remind everybody, we've talked about the need for you to have, training first and foremost, everybody onto how they can really impact whether it's customer expectations, whether it's the internal handling of the product before they go out there, and then when they handle the delivery. So all of that stuff. I mean, if you don't have a real plan there, then our two experts here are saying that you're missing out, and you're probably losing a lot of money on a lot of this reverse logistical issues. And we also know it's important to have good policies in place, and also some not just return policies, but internal policies with all of this as well. But the thing that we started with, and Aaron Dom, I'm going to start with you because you talked about this. So let's do a little real time help here for anybody watching about forecasting. So if you're talking directly, which you kind of are, to these retailers right now and said, okay, here's how you need to set this up. You talked about some of the elements, but all right, tell me right now what I need to do to properly forecast these particular costs in my day-to-day operations. So and Brian, I'll have you jump in whenever you want to as well, but let's talk about this. How do we build that forecasting model for the people that are watching today?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that the market is kind of creating is a greater velocity of new product introductions, which means the greater velocity of new product discontinuations, right? So as you are turning your product line over faster, you need to be doing more nimble with your merchandising planning. The other thing I would say that really I think can help in terms of forecasting is flexible sourcing. So what does that mean? That means increased communications with suppliers and developing redundant sources of supply. And then working with the supply chain to help them be more agile. That means having them involved earlier in the process, kind of giving them some insight into the customer data, and is it integrated across the breadth of the organization so that everybody's on the same page. So it's kind of, let's get involved in terms of building personal relationships, becoming consumers' personal shoppers, and continuing to build brand equity through these relationships and keep the relationship warm.
So, because all right, so I got to pause for a second because this is some great stuff, but the things you're talking about here don't directly fit when we think about reverse logistics, things coming back. But you're
Right.
saying here, so when you talk about your turnover, it's faster. So your concern there would be, I'm assuming, with that training issue, like your staff better be on the fact that these are new things coming in, and it's not just a static SKU selection here, right? Is that what you're talking about there, is making sure that you're on top of the changes, making sure that you're you talked about more nimble planning and merchandising, et cetera. I mean, those things, I wasn't necessarily anticipating those coming up in this conversation, but you're saying those are key.
I feel that the communication burden that we talked about before is only going to become more important, because I think the market is driving the velocity of merchandising planning in an upward direction. So what we need to do is actually kind of have, your binder of all your goods, there's only going to get thicker, right? Because you're going to have to know how to service a broader array of goods.
Gotcha.
And that's on the back end. So you're going to need to have separate policies on a broader array of goods. And anytime you're kind of saying, I need to switch this out because I don't like the way the legs were drilled, we need to take weight out of the tabletop. You need to have kind of policies to accommodate that. So, we're constantly going to be on a learning curve, and that learning curve is only going to be speeding up.
Oh, I love it. So you're just talking about the dynamics of the business, of the industry.
100%.
And it's been so dramatic these last 3.5 years or so. So I get it. I guess what I'm hearing you say too, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to translate it. So in my head, is you're basically saying that don't just look at it when you talk about all these different, this faster turnover, et cetera. It's not just about the merchandising of your floor, but how does this ripple out into all of these aspects of customer communication and handling and delivery to avoid the reverse logistics issues?
Yeah, that's
an
excellent way to summarize it. Thank you so much. And I guess the only thing I'd say is that, I would just add to that is that, look, in this industry, we're used to breathing this big sigh of relief once it's in the customer's location, it's in the customer premise, in their dining room, in their living room. Well, that connection needs to be kept warm. And the way you keep it warm is to constantly communicating internally and then with the customer. And when there's a preference issue, If you're going to keep that customer warm, it's a lot cheaper to keep that customer relationship warm than to start from scratch.
Wow. Brian, jump in on this. This is good stuff.
No, I agree with him 1000%. It's all in line. It starts from the beginning. It starts with the training and everything, but you have to, exactly what he said, you have to know what you're selling. You got to be prepared for what you're selling. You have to have those policies and procedures in place, from the sales side to the deluxing side, all the way to the delivery side and the return side, to bring everything back just in case, right? You have to be prepared. I agree with everything you said.
And so guys, what I'm hearing, because we all look, we're all human, right? We want to have the magic pill, or what's the thing that I can do tomorrow that's going to take care of this problem. And what I'm hearing you guys say in this one is that, and I know you talked about, and Aaron, Don, push back on me if I'm wrong here, but you talked about, data and data being important.
It is.
But what I'm hearing from you guys is yeah, the data is important. However, if it doesn't have the context of all this other stuff we're talking about, that's just a number. That's just a percentage. You've got to make sure that you said nimble, great word. If you're not managing all of this, the training, the education, the understanding, all this stuff, all the data in the world about your percentage coming back is not going to matter, because you're not going to have the ability to really adjust to that. Is that fair?
Yeah, because that's kind of why I went down the wormhole of discussing compensation driving behavior and what behavior you want to drive with your constituents, whether it's your delivery team, your sales team, your service team, because those teams are reinforcing the overall vision at each touch point with the customer. So
Yeah.
if we're being compensated for different things and we're pulling ourselves in opposite directions, the customer relationship is what's ultimately impacted.
And listen, I'll go down that wormhole any day of the week. That's important stuff. Brian, what are some final thoughts on that as well?
I think he said it all pretty much. I mean, I couldn't say it any better, to be honest with you. I mean, I agree with him 100%. And everything that we've said today is a stamp in the right direction. We need to continue to train, continue to forecast, continue to know. But you can have all the data in the world, okay? If you don't know what to do with it, or you don't have policies and procedures in place to handle it, you're still going to lose. So it's important to always go back, training,
Love it.
preparing, making sure you're ready. You can forecast these sales and you're going to be up 50% next year, but are you ready for that? You have to be ready. You have to be ready for any situation. And reverse logistics obviously is an expense, but it has to be managed, and it has to be managed well, because it is an expense. Otherwise you can get hurt.
And it can be a huge expense too. Well,
Yes.
I want to mention, by the way, we talked at the beginning of this webinar about the fact that for those of you that are taking part in the Synchrony and Ignite program, that for watching today, you get a code and you get to have a little bit of reward for that. So the code is ART 1223. Once again, ART 1223 is your Synchrony Ignite code. But guys, listen, this is, and I'm not just saying this to promote this webinar. This is one of those webinars that I think I'm going to go back and watch again, because man, we talked about a lot of key stuff here, but you took it a direction today that I think is critically important for everyone listening to understand that this is a thread that goes through their entire business. It's not just about waiting for what's coming in off the trucks on those returns. That it's everything leading up to that is where the magic can happen, and you can turn that negative into a positive. And like you said, Brian, this is one of the ways, quite frankly, that you can turn a customer into a customer for life if you handle it correctly.
Right.
But I want to thank our two experts today, Brian Lysett, CEO of Service Technologies, a lifecycle management solution provider. Brian, great to have you, and your insights have been great.
Thanks
And Arindam Basu, management consulting with 1,000 Mile Partners. Just loved it. You brought a lot to the table today when it came to some really good stats to really help us all in this process. So for the rest of you, I want to just say thank you for joining us. I always wish you two things. You always know this, right? Great sales, but good health as well. On behalf of all of us here at HFA, I'm Mark Schumacher. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.